Good morning.
Morning. How are you doing?
So well, good to meet you.
Good. Pleasure is mine. Thank you for setting us up today. I like your backdrop. It's like almost looks fake. I
Oh, no, very real.
know. Very nice. Very nice. You
Wait
must
till a
be in
bird
like
flies right over here. No.
Streeterville area.
I am just south of the river. I'm next to the bean.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, my backdrop not so well, so I'm gonna put up a fake one.
No, I love it.
Uh-oh, where did my backdrops go? Oh well, I'll have to look for them. Anyway, I there's Michael Rawls emailed, and he
Oh, I
was
emailed him back. I should
okay.
have CC'd everyone, but I figured you guys didn't need the blowing up of your email in the morning. I
Yeah.
emailed him back with the link from Dr. Yang. Yeah,
Okay, great, great.
excellent.
Yeah, with 500 people, I have no idea how this is going to go, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that hopefully I've done a couple of sessions for open house for Northwestern and things like that.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've done a couple as well for the interview season and open
yeah,
house. I
yeah,
figured I'd just have them pop some questions into the chat box so we're not all talking on top of each other.
sure, sure. Yeah, it's going. We've had that even in the. I can't remember the exact title for that, but it was a PD open house for, University of Wisconsin was there, your PD was there earlier in June, and it was a similar
Mm,
format. Yeah, it'll be good. A lot of things are changing though, so I'm not even sure what I'm going to be saying to this group yet. We'll find out what their questions are.
yeah, I have some standard questions that I'm sure we'll get and some responses and a couple of questions to jot down just in case things slow down. But with, if even, 20, 25% of people show up, I don't really think we'll get too much of a
Yeah,
downtime. Oh, goodness, someone's really early.
I'm gonna look for my backdrop real quick. I'm still listening.
Sure.
Hi,
Morning.
Daniel. Hi, Albert.
Morning, how are
How
you?
are you? It's good to see you.
Good morning. This is Kirti Kulkarni. I'm one of the co-chairs of the event. How are you?
Good, good. I'm actually on call today, so I had to get up early in the morning to try to clean up the list. That
Thank,
was.
thank you for doing it. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, no problem. My pleasure. I know
Daniel,
there's a
so
lot
good
of.
to see you.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm well. Thank you so much
Oh,
for having us.
Yeah, it's going to be a great session.
yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody, and even actually interested in their questions myself.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have a Twitter handle by any chance? I have been tweeting,
Yeah.
and I couldn't find Danielle or Albert. Do you have a Twitter handle that I should?
Honestly, that's probably, I do not.
Okay, no worries. No
But
worries.
I'm working on that. I mean, with everyone doing virtual, and a lot of people like that's definitely one of our shortcomings in our department and our program. So yeah, Twitter, etc. Those things, just not my forte.
No worries. No worries. I am also learning the ropes,
Yeah,
and I've been tweeting for the Chicago Radiology Expo,
yeah,
and just wanted to excite everyone about today's morning session.
yeah. Maybe I'll sign up right now.
Yeah.
Great idea. No, I don't either.
You don't have you're too young for not to have one.
I'm escaping social media for just a little bit.
Yeah.
So I included your universities.
Okay,
Northwestern
great.
Radiology I did, and Loyola I did, and Rush I did. But there's no specific Rush radiology that I could find.
Yeah, same with
And I
us.
couldn't find a specific Loyola radiology. Although there's a Loyola NeuroRad,
Yeah,
the neuro department apparently has their own.
yeah. That's thanks to Maria Bashir. She's been, doing that. I should have her do. She's also our associate program director, so I should do that. Have her set us. But
Oh,
I've been getting the chief residents to look it up. Our institution is pretty strict on social media.
right, right, right.
So yeah, so they have to go through some training sessions, etc. So we're working on that. Once that's done, then they can start posting.
Right. Yeah. So over close to 500 students have registered for today's event. So I am super pumped about that. And I think the morning session is going to be the most hit session because there is nothing else going on concurrently. So I am super excited.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's all across the globe. So we have a lot of, because we do have an international presence.
Well, that's amazing. Makes me want to sign up for Twitter now for real.
Well, you know, it's like homework. I treat Twitter like homework. It doesn't come naturally. And I think we didn't grow up in that era of social media for work. Maybe a few pictures here and there, but not, on Facebook or Instagram, but not really Twitter with a different intention. So I definitely think of it as homework. Like in this week, I definitely want to go twice, see what's happening, tweet what I'm doing, increase the outreach. So.
I love that we're live on YouTube. Is that right?
Yes.
Amazing.
We're streaming right now?
We're streaming.
Yeah. We are. So I'm going to put it in the chat box, the Twitter handle, just in case you get a chance to at least tell them to tag us, because a lot of the users will be using Twitter. So we encourage them. And I did put the hashtag, it's RadExpo 2021. So if at some point, even during and in the middle, if you can mention that, that would be great.
Will do.
Sure. Let me just jot this down.
You already have 12 people on the waiting list.
Yeah, so Torrance is going to, so Torrance, our IT consultant, who you can see here, Torrance Lewis Jr., he is letting everyone in. So they are live. So you all are live. Just wanted.
Yeah, sounds great.
Oh, yeah. I do see people trickling in. Hello, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
I think it'll be great if people can keep their cameras on and make it a little more interactive. This is going to be definitely more of a panel discussion, a Q&A. So I can see people trickling in, but I would really encourage people to keep their camera on. So it's not like a webinar, but more of an interaction.
Oh, I have a question, I guess, for either you or Torrance. Are the students able to, can they unmute themselves, or is it predominantly just a discussion from us and they can type in questions to the chat box?
I think the questions will be in the chat.
Wonderful, that'll be better.
Oh, and Torrance just texted, yes.
Oh, okay, sure.
And unmute. Yeah.
For brave students who want to talk to us.
All right, I'm inspired by your backdrop. So
show us some options.
Actually, I have to like reload them. For some reason, they're not on here.
I think the sun is working against me. I had to lower it down, otherwise it would be kind of coming directly to the face.
We still have 15 minutes. So I think, Daniel, you're going to be taking over and introducing the panelists when it's time.
Yeah, I expect that.
Great. Yeah. Still waiting for Mona and Michael. Oh, I see Mona joined.
Oh, nice. Feel like I should have like a Northwestern emblem here now.
Yeah. I mean, I offer these to all our interviewers in case they want a backdrop. The blur is fine, but it's kind of nice to have something that's official.
Yeah.
Yeah, the virtual interviews have definitely changed the landscape of things, and it's probably here to stay. As much as applicants are wearing ties and suits, etc., formal dress, they now have to think about their backdrops, where they're at, their lighting. Lots of things.
That is, it is interesting, but I've been really impressed with how everyone, I think you're really able to get a sense of everyone virtually. That's been.
Yeah. There was probably a high level of anxiety last year when the virtual interview started.
Oh, sure.
For both sides, both PD and, especially if you consider, our generation of people who are not as tech savvy as your generation, we may have been more nervous about things than the applicants were. But once things started getting rolling and we realized it was pretty smooth sailing, it was a lot less anxious and it went pretty well, I would say. And then the numbers show that, most, if not all programs matched. I think it was like 99.8 spots were filled, something like that last year. So it worked out. Although not as promising statistics for medical students, but that's mainly because there's so many applicants now. We can talk about that, when the session begins.
That is a point of discussion. Hi, Dr. Wells.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good.
Hi, Dr. Rawls. This is Kirti Kulkarni from, I know, you're trying to find where I am on the screen.
Up there on the left.
Yes, thank you for joining. I see Mona here too.
Slowly your backdrop, Danielle. Morning, Dr. Wells. How are you doing?
Morning. Good. So I parked in one of my coworkers' parking lots, so he's kind of mad at me. Just texting me. I have an assigned spot, but it's from Saturday. That shouldn't matter.
Good Saturday morning.
Oh, yay. I see Mona. Hi, Mona. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Can't hear you. Oh.
Yeah, not yet.
Oh, you can't hear me?
Oh, now, yep.
Oh, sorry.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Just a quick question, Dr. Rawls, Dr. Gupta, do you have a Twitter account by any chance?
Not.
Okay,
I have a very inactive one.
but I can tag you.
Yeah, let's see. Kirti, do you want me to tell you what it is, or what's the best way to do this? Put it in the chat box?
Yes, to person, like to me.
Okay, direct message. Here we go.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm feeling a lot better about my social media ineptitude. I thought I was the lone holdout, but I'm with good company, I can see.
So is there like a list of questions or is it just kind of a open session?
I think it'll be an open session. I'll ask the students at the beginning to kind of start popping questions into the chat box. That way, when we're saying, or rather when you guys are saying hello, I can just kind of browse through and pick a couple so we can move pretty smoothly.
Sure.
Dr. Wells, are you on call too?
No, we actually have this mandatory meeting for the whole department about professionalism,
Oh,
which is inconveniently between 9 and 11.
yeah,
So I'm I'm here. I signed in already.
yeah. On a
So,
Saturday, huh?
yeah, they just told us about it. They told us about a month ago. You had to go on one of two dates, on one of two Saturdays, and people kind of have plans. So do the best you can do.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunately not on call, but I am at the hospital.
We'll have to ask Dr. Bashir what the she, her, hers means.
I'm going to step away for a second, but I'll be back. Sorry.
Ah, thank you for the clarification.
Hi, everyone. It's Kirti Kulkarni. I am one of the core committee members of the Expo, and I would encourage the students who have joined in to submit questions if they have any, and also to tweet about the Chicago Radiology Expo, #RadExpo 2021. I'm happy to put it back in the chat. And yeah, so I think if you start putting in some questions and we could even start the discussion a little earlier. But thank you again for joining, and excited about the virtual 6th annual Chicagoland Radiology Expo.
Anyway, I already see a question in the chat box. Who should we direct questions to? It's actually probably easier if you just direct your questions to everyone in the chat. That way, I will be able to easily see it. I already see one question. That's great. If you guys can just start popping them in. Once we get started and do a little introduction, then we'll be able to roll right into it.
Good morning, Anu. How are you?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm good. How are you, Dr. Sam?
Good, good. You have to excuse me, I'm on call, so I'm just perusing through my list here to make sure I'm not missing anything urgent.
That's a fun part of our specialty, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it is amazing that we could participate. I think as bad as COVID has been, it's accelerated the timeline for a lot of these technologies to be more mainstream. So it's very nice.
And if you could request all the participants, like if possible, can you turn on the camera so it's easier for the speakers to have some interaction instead of like talking to the screen? It's okay if you can't, but if you can, please turn on your video cameras, please.
Also, just a quick reminder, please fill out the pre-survey that's on the website. If you haven't, pre-survey, please.
We've started getting questions, so probably we'll take it towards the end of the session.
I see in the chat box that I think not everyone is able to turn on their cameras. That's all right. Those of you who can, feel free to join us. We've already got 66 participants and it's 1:02, so I think I'll get started. So welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of this year's Chicagoland Radiology Expo. Thank you all so much for joining us this Saturday morning. It's really beautiful outside. My name is Danielle Yang. I'm a fourth-year diagnostic radiology resident, and I am one of the DRGs at Northwestern. I'll be your moderator for this panel. for discussing application pitfalls and pearls. So as we get started, I think I talked about this earlier. If you guys could start popping your questions into the chat box, you can just direct it toward everyone. And so as we introduce ourselves, I will be able to smoothly roll over and we can answer all your burning questions. Okay, so with us this morning are our three wonderful panelists. I hope you can see all of them. All of whom actually have a leadership position in education in around Chicagoland. So we have Dr. Mona Gupta, Associate Professor of Interventional Radiology at Northwestern. She is also the IR Medical Student Clerkship Director and one of my amazing IR attendings. We have Dr. Michael Rawls, who is the Diagnostic Radiology Program Director at Rush. So get all your program director questions ready. He specializes in MSK imaging. And we have Dr. Albert Song, Medical Director and Associate Professor at Loyola University, where he is also Diagnostic Radiology Program Director. So I'll let our panelists say hello. Feel free to say a few words about your field or why you love radiology, although I know we can talk about that the whole hour. And in the meantime, I'll collect some questions.
Mona, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Good morning. So my name is Mona Gupta. I'm an interventional radiologist at Northwestern, as Danielle mentioned. I completed my fellowship in 2009 and I went the old way. So I did 5 years of radiology training and a year of fellowship training. And as a lot of you guys know now, IR training has changed dramatically and for the better. A direct pathway you match directly into, you still end up double board certified in diagnostic and interventional radiology, but you finish with so much more experience. I think interventional radiology is kind of healthcare reform at its best, right? We're minimally invasive, we're an alternative to surgery, shorter recovery times, and it's just kind of a lot of fun. We get to intervene in almost every body system. So I love what I do, and I'm happy to talk about it. Thanks for having me.
Mike Rawls, I'm the program director at Rush. I'm going in my 3rd year as a program director and 6th year as an attending. I also did my residency at Rush. So I've been in the system for about 10 years. I hate to call it the old way of 5 years plus 1. It doesn't seem too old. I feel like I'm still young. Yeah, I specialize in musculoskeletal imaging, which is nice here at Rush because we work with the Bulls and the White Sox and some high-end athletes. As much as Mona loves IR, I equally don't like IR. So there's a DR side. So the good thing about radiology is there's lots of different fields and you can go down lots of different ways. There's lots of different interests. So I think it's a very broad field that anyone interested can find a place and be very happy.
Morning. My name is Albert Song. I'm the program director at Loyola. How long I've been? I lose count after a while. I think it's my 6th year as program director, and it's been an awesome experience. I find my job primarily is to advocate for the residents and protect their educational experience. And it's been great at Loyola. I think that Loyola supports us pretty well. In regards, I'm also a musculoskeletal imager. And yeah, it is very broad field. I would have to say I'm probably in the middle of somewhere between Dr. Gupta and Dr. Rawls. I do like procedures and I do like diagnostic radiology, and MSK allows me to do both. And so it is, you will find a spot for sure where you fall in between therapeutic versus diagnostic radiology. The field is pretty variable and open, and so you have a lot of choices.
Thank you, guys. So I think we have a mixed crowd today. We have some earlier on medical students, which is wonderful, from M1s and M2s, and then we have people who are more looking at the application cycle. So one of the beginning questions I think is a very good one is, why did you choose radiology? I think that you guys have already hit upon some of it, but if you want to take it away, I can finish up.
Yeah, I could start with that. You know, I remember back when I was a 4th year resident or medical student trying to decide. I was in that group where I decided pretty late. I think it's true that most medical school programs do not have a dedicated radiology requirement and may offer it as an elective, so your experience and exposure to radiology can be quite limited. And that was me when I was a medical student, and I had a good friend who was deciding on radiology. And I remember thinking early on, radiology, why would you go into radiology? That's not real medicine, is how I kind of thought back in the day. And I was thinking about family medicine. as a fourth year resident or medical student, I applied to both. And eventually I decided to go into radiology. And I think, in terms of my personality and my interests, it definitely aligned with radiology. I really enjoyed being that consultant. I like to be really involved with every medical aspect. And I was a little bit, taken back by one of my focuses was global health back in the day. And I was amazed by what opportunities there actually was in radiology. I think that most people assume that most sort of global health equity sort of situations, there is not much imaging available overseas in these underserved areas, but there are a lot of resources. It's just the problem is that there's lack of utilization in terms of those resources. So I realized at that point that radiology was a wide open field that aligned a lot with my personal interests, and so I went for it. Retracted a lot of my family medicine applications and never looked back. Don't regret a single day with my decision.
Yeah, I kind of had the opposite experience. I had a family member that was a radiologist, so I knew in like high school I wanted to be a radiologist, even though I didn't exactly know what they were doing back then. And I think for me, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I always knew I didn't want to kind of be on the front lines. And I didn't want to be in a clinic. I didn't want to be in an operating room. And I think of like surgeons and primary care as like the rock stars on stage, and the radiologists are kind of like the production people in the background, putting it all together behind the scenes. So I thought that would be my best avenue in radiology, because I knew I didn't want to be like in the office, seeing a patients all day. And also kind of being the doctor's doctor is a nice thing, being a consultant. And I think like anything else, if you do something long enough, it gets boring. But I think radiology is so broad, unless you're very subspecialized, that there's every different body system. You deal with every different clinical service. So you can never really conquer radiology. There's just so much, and it's very diverse. So it keeps things interesting.
So if any of my med students are on, I'll sound like a broken record. But I think as a medical student, you have these big decisions you have to make kind of early on. And I think one of the major branch points is, are you going to be a proceduralist or not? And within both of those two branch points, there's a ton of options. Some people would argue there's another branch point. Are you going to take care of kids or adults? Very early on, I kind of decided I wanted to be a proceduralist. And I very quickly went through a lot of the surgical subspecialties. And, after spending a lot of time in ENT and neurosurgery, I found my way to interventional radiology, and I really loved it. And one of the things I loved about it was that some of my other friends who went into surgical subspecialties, like ophthalmology was wonderful, but I couldn't imagine giving up all those 4 years of medical school just to focus on the eye. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't right for me. And I loved the breadth of IR. Yesterday I was on call, and I was in the kidneys, in the lungs, in the uterus, in the legs, in the liver. So every day is really broad. I must say I loved all of diagnostic radiology. It was a fantastic training, but I kind of went into radiology with my eyes on IR, and that's where I landed. And I mean, for me, I love the breadth of the field. I love the daily interactions with lots of clinicians and lots of patients. I tell my medical students that the average case is about an hour, which is my attention span. Some cases are 5 minutes and some cases are 4 hours, but you can kind of average it out. I love the technology. It's constantly turning over. There's a lot of innovation. The field is constantly changing, and that's what I really love about it.
I completely agree. I think the breadth of radiology and within your three fields are, it is so wide. You can be 100% diagnostic radiology and spend your day in the reading room. You can be working with MR, CT, ultrasound radiographs, or you can be spend some of your day during procedures, or more of your day during procedures in IR and mammography. I think the other thing that I love about radiology is, with chronic illnesses and these longevity to medical issues in clinical medicine, you don't really see that in radiology to such a great extent. Sometimes if you like to do problem sets, I say that's it's a great part of radiology. Parts of diagnostic radiology are kind of one and done. You get to close on and move to a new problem and come up with a new solution. So the next question that we have, this is a great one. So our applicants are asking, with respect to social media, does that hurt? Is it necessary? Is it hurtful? Or would it be looked at during the application process?
I think that's going to depend on the program and how big their kind of admission applications committee is, how many people they have reviewing applications. I can tell you, and maybe Dr. Song can speak, I suspect it'll be similar. We had more applications this year by like 20% compared to last year, and it was probably 15% more last year than the year before that. It's hard just to read all the applications, much less try to track down somebody's social media. I think if you're like, do something cool on social media, you're like an influencer or something, or something you want somebody to see, maybe you could put it in your personal statement or in your hobbies and interests. And if I saw that, I might take a chance and look at it and just to see if it was something cool. But just in general, I don't have nearly the amount of time to even attempt to look at social media.
Yeah, I agree. The resources are lacking with the number of applications that are coming in. We saw, I think, a 30% increase this year. But if you look at the early numbers for the application, it's 2,000 applicants this year versus 1,700 last year. So there's definitely been a huge increase in applications to radiology. It's virtually impossible for us to go through all of these with a fine comb, unfortunately. I mean, I think that the stress has been to look at medical students holistically, and that's one of the reasons why step one is becoming pass-fail, but it's being increasingly difficult. I would have to say, like, for you applicants, first, second years for sure, third years maybe, take a look on the ERIS website for the supplemental application. It's going to answer a lot of these questions that are coming through here. That's going to, APDR says that's going to be active probably 2023 season, but possibly 2022, we just don't know. But it's already active for things like internal medicine. So take a look at that. It's going to show you what we care about as program directors. It's 5 things. I think it's like 5 things that shaped you as a medical student. Regional preferences, preference signaling, all of those things are things that were created by ERIS in association with program directors to focus on holistic evaluation and what is important to us as program directors. So that, take a look at that, and I think it'll help you understand that part of it. But yeah, we don't have. I agree with Dr. Rawls. Like, I've looked at social media maybe in the last 5 years, like 3 times, and it's only when somebody points it out to me and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, let me take a look at it. Otherwise, I just don't have the resources or time to go through that. So I don't, but I have heard some people do, just an FYI. Put it out there.
Okay. We have a couple of students who've asked a similar question. It's to be expected. Essentially, what do you look for in a resident when it comes to the application cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a broad question. I'll do my best to answer it. Obviously we want the best and brightest people and all that, and that's great. And, from my perspective, how do I tell what's the best and the brightest? This score, medical, grades, your step scores, things like that. That plays, that's at least a quantitative way of looking at somebody and saying, oh, they got great scores, they must be doing something right. So that's a part of it. Another big part of it for me is I want to give interviews and try to get people to my program that I think will actually come to my program. We're a Midwestern place. My program, I guess we're mid-size or medium-size. It's hard for a rush to grab people from the East Coast or the West Coast just based on geography. So that's a big part of it. I think, no matter where you're at, there's going to be a strong regional preference, particularly in these days of so many more applicants than there used to be. And then trying to, expand on the more holistic thing. I'm looking at anything that shows leadership, whether it's, you took the role in a research project. I don't really care what the research was personally. It's just where you took a leadership role, something volunteering, some kind of project, anything that shows that you're kind of a leader and you had to take responsibility for something and you executed. Those kind of things stick out. And when I'm looking through the applications, I try to pull those things out. I don't really care if you got published in a major journal, or if you just got I'm sorry, that's probably a good thing. I don't care if you just got your name on something and you're the last author, or you presented something, I want to know what you did in that project, no matter what was your leadership role and kind of how did you execute it. And so I try to take some variation of those 3 things and put them together. If you've reached out to me, particularly if you're not in my region, or you're at the Chicago Radiology Expo and you reached out and I saw your face and you asked a question and I know I have a face to put to that application, or a work colleague of mine or word of mouth or anything, that always helps too. And then I guess the last thing, I always look for red flags. If you've got a 2-year gap in between college and medical school, I want to know what you were doing. If took you 6 years to get through medical school, I want to know what happened in those 2 years. If you got an MBA and MPH, that's great. But I just want to know. So I'm looking for reasons. I mean, there's so many applicants. I'm almost looking for reasons not to give interviews sometimes. And if you can pull out a red flag, you can say, okay, cross this one off the list, on to the next 1,000.
I think for IR, one of the things we're often looking at is, has a student had significant IR experience? Because sometimes you come to a big level 1 trauma place that's, tertiary care, and you haven't had IR experience. And, we're not just ports and PICC lines. It's pulsatile blood in the middle of the night. And so we're often trying to make sure we're not getting somebody in over their head. So for us, we're making sure you know what IR is. You've spent some time on an IR rotation. We're not looking for aways or tons of research. We're obviously looking for leaders who have a good work ethic. We obviously try to make a lot of phone calls. IR is still a small field, and so it's generally pretty easy to call somebody and say, "Oh, have you worked with this guy, this girl? What do you think? Would she be an asset?" So those connections are really valuable. But also, I just think doing the rotations as a medical student and really understanding the field helps your application.
Sure. And I think with respect to the DR side that I'm involved with, I think that, looking good on paper is certainly important, but it doesn't mean the same thing to all people and to all programs. So we are always trying to build diversity even within our classes. So your clinical evaluations, your grades, your letters of recommendations, that's excellent. But we're also looking for diversity in terms of background, life experience, work experience. I think that's very valuable as well. Okay, so as a tag on to this question, because we are seeing such a high volume of applicants this year, what would our panelists recommend to a student who is currently in the cycle, so in applications now?
I mean, we've given out our interviews. I presume at this point in time, probably most people have. Sometimes people do a second wave, but I think if you didn't get an interview you wanted, all you can do is try to reach out to the program director and explain your interest. Other than that, I don't think there's much you can do. And unfortunately, with this virtual interviewing, similar to last year, like I say, we only had 1 or 2 people not scheduled that we offered interviews, compared to our usual. It's January, it's a blizzard in Chicago, and it costs money to come here. Usually 10 or 15 people cancel their interviews, which I always count on. With the virtual interviews, at least last year, that was not the case. So I'm not sure there's much you can do other than reach out and express your interest.
Yeah, nothing to add to that, except that we had a similar sort of pattern where we had very few people. It's too convenient to interview, so we had few people actually cancel. But reach out. We could put you on a wait list. And if by chance somebody does cancel, then there's a chance. But we also have scheduled all of our interviews for the season.
Totally agree. I think it's always great to reach out. I will just say that it's always good to be genuine. Copy and pasting a list of reasons from a website, it's usually pretty easy to tell. Our next question is, what do our panelists think about teleradiology and opportunities to be out of the hospital? And I think this might be a little more DR based.
I don't have any experience personally with teleradiology, but it sounds appealing. I just can't speak to it too much. I don't know if Dr. Song's got any experience.
I mean, I don't have any direct experience with teleradiology, although I do work with groups that cover for our Nighthawk services and things like that. Loyola has a couple affiliated hospitals here, I do think that it is a very important sort of direction for life-work balance for some people. Allows for a lot of flexibility, convenience of working at home. I mean, the things that people are doing nowadays because of the COVID, forcing people to work at home, has been existing in the world of teleradiology for a long time. And the market has improved such that working weekends, nights has become a lot better. I mean, I think market standard is probably something like 1 week on, 2 weeks off. So you're working about a third of the week, or a third of the year. I mean, and it is long hours overnight, so it's kind of hard for some people. But if your body is wired to be able to do that, I think it's a great option. I personally I wouldn't want to do teleradiology, as I like to be connected, and I think you get a little disconnected with the hospital and the services. And so I like to work with people, and hence that's why a big reason I'm in part of the academic arena. It's because you're working very intimately with people. But teleradiology, you have to be ready to just kind of work in your office at home for long hours and be okay with that. But the trade-off again is a lot of flexibility, a lot of time off.
I just wanted to take a moment to point out that we have had a lot of questions about life in the day, or IR and ESIR, and we do have a couple of panels later on in the day that will better address those. We're happy to answer some of those if we don't have additional questions that are more directed to the application cycle and for M1s and M2s. So I think a good question for our panelists would be, we've talked about what do you look for in a resident? I think it's also important to talk about what should residents look for in a program. So.
I can tell you my personal experience, and unfortunately it's virtual interviews, but I liked actually setting foot in the place, seeing how the residents interacted with each other to the extent that I could, see how they interacted with their attendings, and actually just talking to the residents and asking how they feel supported. Are they just working and not getting a lot of education? Or are they getting a lot of education, but they're not allowed to do a lot of work? So I thought that was more important to me than, how much research money the institution has or what the name on the place has. Looking at fellowship placement, although, fellowship's not quite as hard in general to get into as residency. Same thing, residency is probably a little easier to get into the medical school. You can go to a great fellowship from any program if you put in the work and do what you're supposed to do. I think eventual job placement, do you know where you want to live? If you want to live in Chicago, it's not a bad idea to go to Chicago program. If you want to live in Seattle, maybe you should go to a Seattle program. And that's not a hard and fast rule, but I think where you want to end up should be a consideration. Other than that, I think it's hard to really judge a radiology program based on the stuff on their website and the stuff in US News and the famous people they have working there putting out papers, as it reflects the education training as a resident in the radiology department as opposed to the whole institution.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an IR perspective, it's pretty easy to know. Each place sort of has its own sort of culture and what their strengths are or weaknesses. And I think it's hard to know as a medical student exactly what you want to get into, but if you're heading into IR, you need to go to a place that has just large volumes. I mean, the more you do, the better you'll be. You have to know if your place has a lot of autonomy. Are you going to be a primary operator, or are you going to be the third scrub all the way down the leg for most of your cases? Those sort of things are really important heading into a more procedural field.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I think that looking at, in general, I would say most academic programs are very similar in the way they're structured and the offer that they can, or the education they can offer you, experiences. There's minor things like in the hospital, maybe it's a trauma center versus a transplant center versus a cardiac center. I mean, where there might be some specialties that may make your experience a little different. One thing that you should really think about is, do you want to do academics or private practice? And then at that point, I think you should definitely aim for that academic position. Look at the makeup of the sections. I think that all academic centers, are somewhat subspecialized, but not necessarily equally so. So look for their subspecialization. I think fellowships are great. I agree with Dr. Rouse. The fellowship placement is not as much of a problem post residency. I would say the fellowships, you have to be careful a little bit. Some fellowships, I think fellowships are great, and if done well, they actually augment the radiology residency program. Sometimes they can actually take away experience because it can get a little bit crowded for shared experiences. So just kind of look into that. If it's done well, I think it's a great symbiotic relationship that can happen, but it can also be a little bit of a competitive field in that aspect. And then I think it's really difficult. A lot of the things that we talk about are subjective, and so you just have to get a feel and get to know the people as you go through the interviews. I think some programs are actually offering on-site visits. That gets a little bit tricky because we want to be very careful not to put undue pressure on applicants for the ranking process. I think each program is handling that a little bit differently. It'll be very interesting to see how that evolves. But yeah, I agree. It's a very difficult process to decide when you're sight unseen. But we're trying our best to get as much information out to the interviewees as possible.
Can I tag something on to what Dr. Song just said? I tell applicants this all the time. There are so many good programs. I mean, ours is great, but I know the program up at Wisconsin is amazing. So you really have to think of it also as to like the larger aspects of your life. Are you moving a significant other? What do you like doing in your free time? Where do you want to live? I mean, this is kind of like the rest of your life. So I like to also tell them to approach it with like the idea that there's a lot of great programs out there. It's not one and done, and make sure the other components of your life, also fit into place there, because you will. I mean, it's 5 years of your life. It's not a short period of time.
And keep in mind, you're interviewing for like a year and a half for a position, like a year and a half from when you actually interview. So if the call schedule is really cushy, or this person's here, and all that might be changed by the time you get there. Things change all the time. So I think the core structure of the place usually doesn't change that much, or not as quickly at least. So try not to get bogged down in the fine details about they get this moonlighting opportunity, or they get this much money on their cards when they're on call, and those little things don't matter.
Completely agree with that, all of that. And as somebody who's still currently in training, I would just tack on two small things. One is talk to the residents. I mean, you get some interaction with them on the day of, but you'll have opportunities the day before or the day after as an evening event. See what they say about education. You want to hear that not only is it kind of a strong didactics, but you also want to be reading out and learning on a day-to-day basis. I think that's incredibly important. And then another point is how do residents raise issues up with leadership? How supportive is leadership? I think that's incredibly important as well. Ask them to give you an example of how the program has responded to one of their concerns, or ask the program directors or APDs, what is something that you're working on to implement for the residency? And then how are residents involved in that decision? How do they come up with a solution with you? So those are my 2 cents as well. And the next question that we have is, this is a wonderful question. How important is the interview? So we have a student who is asking, is the interview worth, say, 50% or, roughly half of the final ranking, or is it more or less? And then can our panelists clarify whether they typically rank applicants immediately after the interview or much later? I'm not sure if that's part of the secret sauce.
I mean, for me, the interview serves 2 purposes. One is I just want to make sure you can communicate, because believe it or not, radiologists have to communicate to people a lot. Either directly if you're a proceduralist or talking to patients, or if you're a mammographer, but even just communicating through your reports, creating reports that are, include all the information they need without, in the most direct way possible. So, you're constantly talking to other physicians, other healthcare people, techs, whoever, patients sometimes. So you got to be able to talk, and you need to be able to communicate well. So that's the first thing I'm looking for. And then I'm also kind of looking for, again, like red flags a little bit. If you come in and you're kind of unkempt, or, just anything that stands out as weird, like, why you had to hold it together here for, 20 minutes or for an hour for an interview. You couldn't hold it together. I'm looking, like, I usually swear a lot. I'm trying not to today, but like if I swear in an interview, then you start swearing. No, you can't do that. I'm just anything where I'm just like, nah, that wasn't right. And then obviously I want to know about you a little bit and try to get to learn your personality, but you can only do that in, a 15 or 20 minute interview so much, particularly when you're on like interview 50, it's kind of like everyone's kind of going through the motions. So those are kind of the 3 things that I'm looking for in the interview. I don't think I could put a % weight on it. But there's certainly been people I thought were going to be rock stars, and after the interview, they went to unranked. And there were people I didn't think were very interested, and I found out something about them, and I said, "Oh, they're very interested." So in general, it's just another part of the puzzle, but it can make or break you here and there.
I agree with that. I think it takes about 5 minutes to look up the people you're going to be meeting with and just have like the tiniest bit of background on them. And maybe you find a common spot. I mean, I've had a person come into the residency be like, oh, you know, the interview saying, I see you did your residency at Emory. And I think, wow, that person took a little extra time to look into the program, a little extra interest. An applicant sticks out in my head from a few years ago that came to Northwestern and asked at the interview to one of my colleagues, oh, you know, SIR is next week. Any of you guys going? And this colleague happened to be running the meeting that year. And so, you know, we were all kind of like, oh, glad you're here. So take the extra 5 minutes, look up the program, look up the people you're meeting with, and just, you know, convey a genuine interest.
Yeah, our process is pretty transparent. You know, the application review process. Once that's over, we've already invited the people that we're going to interview, and especially after this COVID with virtual interviews, all of our spots are taken. So at that point, the assumption is that you guys are, whoever is coming is qualified. We would love to have you here on paper. And then at that point, it becomes an interview process, and that stratifies already a smaller cohort of people. So for us, like, it's a very democratic process. We all the interviewers, including the residents, have equal scores for us, and so we score, and then we don't rank. We just kind of list the people by their score, by their total score. It's a very simple democratic process. So if you look at it that way, the interview is 100%. But the assumption is that the interviewers are taking everything into account by their score. So I'm not sure if you can easily separate the two. But I agree 100%. Human connections are very important in the interview process. And I would fill your application with real, meaningful, relatable human interactions and connections. Even things like hobbies and stuff like, oh, you know what, I like that too. And then we can talk about it. And then the more dynamic, the more interesting the conversation becomes, even though it might be not much about radiology, can make a big impact. And so I would definitely make sure that you put those type of things in your applications. It's sort of like material that the applicant and interviewer can use to just connect with you. And that's really important. I'm going to be sitting together in this dark room, side by side for 8 hours a day. We just want to make sure that we can get along, that we not just get along, but enjoy each other's company, that we'll just feed off of one another, energize one another. There's this compatibility that we're looking for that we really want. We want to see a good fit. We want to be good for you, for your career development, and we want you to be good for us in our program development. So it goes back and forth. And so we're looking for that right fit in these interviews.
Just make sure whatever you put in your application is true. You know, if you speak Portuguese, you never know that person interviewing you might speak Portuguese too. If you're, you play the piano and you don't know anything about the piano, just make sure you do what you say you do. Even particularly with research, if you led this thing and you did a research thing, then you presented it somewhere, and then you did a poster somewhere, all for this thing, and they asked you about it, and you really just like collected some data for a couple of hours, that's a problem. So just be honest on the application.
Yeah, I'll have to stress that honesty is a huge thing, but it's not just about getting caught in an interview. I've actually had some experiences where residents were caught falsifying some information on their application afterwards, and that can get you in big trouble. I mean, we're talking about termination type of trouble. So be careful. I mean, honesty is very important, but it's also important in the long term of your career.
Excellent. Okay, so our next question, I'll kind of put it into a two-parter. One is looking into the future. Is next year's applications expected to be virtual? And then the second part of that is, are there any things that you've seen on interviews that you would recommend avoiding? So any red flags during the interview?
I don't think there's a statement yet on virtual versus not. I suspect it will be in person. I thought it would be in person this year, to be honest, but I think the Delta wave kind of killed that. So I'd probably plan on for it being in person. I mentioned a couple things, come well-dressed, well-shaven, well-manicured, come on time, speak to everybody from the parking attendant to the coffee person to whoever with respect, like regular, because you never know. Again, I've been here for 10 years. I know everybody. And so if you were walking down the hall and you did something and the environmental services guy saw you and they find out you interviewed with me, I might find out too. So it's pretty basic stuff. There's nothing out of the ordinary, just basic stuff. You got to hold it together for an hour. Don't swear, and have some questions to ask, and make sure you know your own application. So if somebody asks you about something, you're not dumbfounded like, oh, I forgot I put that on there.
I've been hearing murmurs that virtual interviews are here to stay, but that's sort of determined by societies, etc., even institutions. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have a clear answer to that. There has been no official word on that. The virtual interviews have been an interesting experience. We're wearing suits and ties still virtually as you're sitting in your bedroom or your living room or something like that. I think that the convenience of it, the cost savings of it for the medical students are very high. The cons are, again, sight unseen sort of decision making and ranking. That's a big problem. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of hybrid sort of system where you can virtually interview, you could come on site. Again, some pressures in terms of like, will this be perceived as less interest by me if I don't come in person might be a problem. They'll have to figure that out. I think hopefully, construct some sort of a statement on that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and I would be careful like how you interview, I mean, just think about like your camera and things like. As much as you're trying to wear a suit and tie and look very professional, like think about your camera, your lighting, your background, etc. Like think about all those things. Even camera placement. One of the awkward things personally, like where I was kind of struggling with, is when an applicant would have a camera here and their screen was over here, and they would be kind of doing this during the it was very distracting. But those things, I try to give it a benefit of doubt, but it can be very distracting at sometimes. So just keep that in mind. You're trying to have a real conversation online as well, and so think about your setup, your lighting, etc. That's as important probably as your like how you're dressed, etc.
And if you're in your bedroom, no clothes on the floor behind you, no dogs running through, preferably like for me, like a white background or just something basic, not outside at the park, like pretend like it's a real business meeting.
That's perfect. Thank you. Our next question is for the change next year. So how do our program directors and our educational leadership expect applications to change with step one becoming pass-fail?
From an IR perspective, it gets really tricky. As faulty as step one is, it was just a way to just group applications generally. And we all admit that it's not the best way. So it's really going to come down to what you have done to show your interest in that field. And for IR, it's, are you a member of the societies? And it doesn't mean you need to go to the meetings, but it means, there's all these virtual forums, all these different clubs and groups. Are you active in those groups? Are you doing the rotations? Maybe you've dabbled in some research. We're just going to be really looking for, general interest, and then clerkship grades, how did you perform on that? Were you a leader? Were you a team player? Were you a problem person? Those letters of recommendation go a long way. And then, if you have a genuine interest in a specific place, I tell residents or med students to really make it known to the people at your place, and maybe somebody can make a phone call for you and say, this is for real. This person is not just sending out 100 applications all across the country. This one is a genuine interest in your place in particular. But I think it's going to be tricky. You really have to find a way to set yourself apart.
Yeah, just bringing back that supplemental application concept again. So ERAS has launched that for internal medicine, surgery, and I think derm or opto. I can't remember which one it is. And again, these are things that are probably going to take over screening tools like Step 1 or whatever people are using. There's the preference signaling is where you indicate, I can't remember what it was, 3 to 5, I think, or I think it was 5 programs that you're very interested in. They're gonna know that you're interested in them. I think a lot of programs are probably going to use that for at least some screening. There's also regional preference. I think there's something like 9 U.S. Regions that you can indicate 3 regions, your top 3 regions. So again, these are things that program directors always wanted to know. And then, but then, the applicants would send us emails or put it in their personal statement, and we weren't sure of how the validity of some of these statements. But now through ERA, since they're limiting your choices here, that it's going to allow us to see the honesty behind some of these choices. So I think that's going to play a huge role. But it's not just that. I think that a lot of medical students are a little bit concerned about the supplemental application because it feels like you're putting all your cards on the table, and the programs are not putting any of their cards on the table. I would have to say my response to that, I completely understand that, and it can be nerve-wracking. I guess our cards on the table is invite. We're going to be inviting you, and we've actually, I consider that an investment. I mean, we have a limited number of interview spots, and we are investing in you and your application. So that shows us we have committed to ranking you, or at least considering you for the rank list. So that comes down to like from 950 applications this year to something like less than 100 applicants. So that definitely changes the role. But the supplemental application doesn't limit itself to things like preference signaling, but it's also tries to again give us tools to understand you holistically. So you get to choose, I think, 5 things that really shaped your yourself in medical school. Now, there's so much material in the application, it's very hard to get this type of information through. So if you can summarize it very succinctly into these 5 things, I think, and it's actually limited to a number of words, that I think that can be really a great tool for us to understand who you are. So my guess is that the supplemental application is going to come. APDR says 2023 is when they might start, but you just never know. If it was a grand slam this year for internal medicine, they might open it up to more programs. And I think more programs will be very interested, especially when step 1 becomes pass-fail for the application process. So look into that. I mean, just plan your application through that. I think a lot of people will start using that. For me personally, if that becomes real for us, I'm probably going to use that primarily. And then I'm going to use the application as sort of filler information. What else do I need to know about this person?
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo that. I think regionality and geography is going to have a big part in it. If you're not one of the handful of programs that kind of has a national reach, because then people want to, you only have so many interviews to give, and you want to give interviews to people you think you got a good chance at getting. I think going into your medical school grades, particularly the perceived more rigorous rotations like surgery, your sub-Is, doing good on those is probably more important, at least to me, than I don't care how you did on your radiology elective, whether it's a pass or honors. And I know you probably didn't really do anything, or any other kind of like more subspecialty elective, which is not as rigorous, but somewhere you actually have real responsibility, like medicine, surgery, and AI. Those grades stand out. And as Dr. Song said, trying to highlight what you do and summarize it somewhere, because I can tell you that the dean's letters are anywhere from about 5 to 10 pages. Every medical school's grading system is different, and I don't know what any of it means. I mean, some are pass fail, some are honors, high pass, some have like pass with distinction if you're in the top 10% of pass. It's just very confusing. So even then, I don't really know what most of that stuff means. I do my best to review it, but it's really hard, and every program's different. So if you can try to highlight, even within your grades somewhere, tell me somewhere you honored surgery and medicine in your sub-I, so I don't have to find it in your dean's letter, and that stands out, and that will be helpful. I tried to put a lot less emphasis on step 1 this year. There were several applications where they seem like kind of rock stars on paper. They're kind of complete, great letters of recommendation, etc. But maybe the step 1 score wasn't as good as I would have liked. But I said, hey, I think this person's really good, and I think that's going to be have to be the approach, and just putting a little bit more emphasis on everything else. But I don't think one thing is going to trump the other one. And I've said, reaching out and expressing your interest is always helpful.
That's perfect. We are coming closer to the hour, but we have time for a couple more questions. So let's see, this question is from, I've heard this from a student before. So what would you consider an important secondary skill to being a proficient radiologist? So some students think that they have to be good at AI, or they have to be good at anatomy. So wanted to hear your thoughts.
I would say start off being good at your primary skills, like the basics, like coming to work on time, leaving when you're, after your attending tells you it's okay to leave, coming to your conferences on time. So make sure you got the basics down, because you'd be surprised at this level how many people don't. Other than that, I think it's just work ethic. I don't think there's any other specific secondary skill. I mean, if you're good with your hands, you'll probably be better than IR. You know, if you got better vision, you might be slightly better at DR. But yeah, I think it's really just your general attitude towards work, and kind of being proactive and a go-getter. Those are the people I think tend to succeed. If you're real quiet and passive, depending on the program, I think it's easy to get lost in radiology, particularly as a first-year resident where you're not really helpful for the most part. So yeah, that would be my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the good work ethic. You know, we want that person that's showing up early and staying late. You know, I think that's huge. One of the old program directors in IR would ask all the applicants if they played a musical instrument, because he thought that hand-eye coordination correlated well for IR. I'm not sure if that's true or if it translates to video games, but it's kind of an interesting point you could bring up in an interview.
I echo that. I think another word I use is citizenship. You know, we don't want to be chasing around. Like, there's a lot of modules you have to do, a lot of things you have to just sign off. And sometimes we're chasing residents around when they're not doing them. They're not keeping up on those sort of deadlines. That's a lot of work for the PDs. We enjoy being an advocate for the residents and educating, and we don't necessarily enjoy chasing people around to check this list and things like that. That's just part of the job that we don't enjoy. So we just appreciate it when people are more on top of things on that. I'm not sure how you would show that in your application. Second thing I would say is when somebody mentioned anatomy, I think a lot of anatomy courses you can do well in, but you may not understand cross-sectional anatomy. You may understand surgical anatomy and dissecting anatomy, but then you might get lost when it's a cross-sectional. When you're a student, don't forget to look at cross-sectional imaging while you're studying for anatomy. Get that in early, because sometimes people will struggle with that early on, the first and second years maybe, to understand they might understand anatomy very well. You know, surgeons understand anatomy very well, but they might struggle with cross-sectional even. Last thing I would say is something that Dr. Rawls kind of mentioned earlier is communication. I think it goes beyond just being a good communicator. I think there's a little bit of, you need to sort of remember sort of your roots and understand the clinician. We are generating reports, and sometimes we get lost in our own radiology world. We word things a certain way, and it makes 100% sense to us, but it may not make any sense to a clinician. So just, when you're on your clinical rotations now, when you go into your internship, just remember to try to understand where clinicians are coming from, what their perspectives is, because we have a lot of complaints sometimes as radiologists about why does this clinician or why does this service do this, but they have their reasons, and I think if we keep up the communication, you'll understand their perspective, and I think that healthcare would go a lot smoother that way if we would just talk to one another. It's kind of like relying on email and chat for all the times. I think we have to break down these walls and just remember where these clinicians are coming from. And I think both of us have the same goal, is to provide quality, excellent patient care, and that only goes by understanding what the clinician needs to know.
Those are all great points. So before we move on to the next question, I am announcing that the code for this session is Tesla. Again, the code for this session is Tesla. You'll need to collect them all at the end. So next questions, and I'll split this into a two-parter. One, are thank you notes post-interviews, do they make a difference or not? And then the second part is, if a current applicant has a mentor reaching out to your program on their behalf, who would you like to hear from?
I think like emails or thank you notes are nice, but they have zero weighting for me. They kind of make me feel like I'm doing something with my life. But because then if you say they mean something, then everyone's going to do it. And if someone doesn't, they may feel like, they have to. So if you send one, that's great. It'll probably make me feel good for a few seconds, but that's not going to make or break you. And I'd prefer if you didn't, then nobody feels the pressure. I forgot the second.
I do feel that a written note is sometimes better than an email, because it takes away the need to respond, especially like when it's coming down to that 9th hour and you'd like to express your last minute interest in a place and how genuine it is and how much, you've gone through all the interviews and this is the one that stands out, blah, blah, blah. An email, like, I think then you're sitting at your computer waiting for a response that you're not going to get because everybody's way too busy. So sometimes a written letter kind of takes the pressure off the program. And if I'm going to get a phone call, again, IR is so small. And so if you're going to have somebody make that phone call, have it be somebody that's a friend of a friend, or, trained with somebody, or worked with somebody, or spoke on a panel with them. Those connections are easy to make. And if you're a med student at a program that's interested in IR, talk to your mentors there. This is where I want to go. Do you know anybody who works there or trained there? Can you put in a good word for me? But if you have them put in a good word for you, I will also say this: you better be sincere about it. That whole thing about honesty, this has happened so many times in the past where, you've written a letter for a med student to go do an away rotation, and then they decide not to go, or they choose something better. Those sort of things really, they stick with you, and you don't want that sort of a label.
Yeah, I would have to say that it's sort of a double-edged sword in terms of thank you letters. I think you have to consider our perspective here. Like, so let's say I'm interviewing 100 people or something like that, and then again, we have a limited sample cohort here, and all of you are excellent applicants. You're excellent applicants, and so by the time we're like, again, on paper, we would love to have you there. And so you all blend in. That's the unfortunate part. It's very hard. I mean, in the ranking process, we'll talk about, oh, what about Mike? And what about John? I'm like, I can't remember. It's been 100 people. I can't remember them, and I can't pull them apart. So sometimes, like, not to disagree with Dr. Rawls, but sometimes, like, you want to increase your imprinting as much as you can, and just send out these thank you letters. Now, I agree with 100% though. When you have 100 of them, they still blend in. And you can't figure it out. But I think at risk of overloading my inbox, I think it can help. I'm not sure, and it probably won't hurt, is my guess. But that's, again, you want to stand out in some way, be somewhat memorable, because I just can't remember all these people after a 20-minute interview. I mean, personally, that's a struggle of mine. And not to say that all of you guys are not individuals. You're all very special individuals. It's just very hard to sort of maintain that sort of perspective when we're interviewing so many similar backgrounds and applications. I agree with Dr. Gupta. Like, somebody who knows me goes a long way. I mean, I think that even the letters of rec, I would say that the vast majority of the letters of rec are sort of based on a 4-week rotation and things like that. It's a pretty limited experience. So they don't really help me understand you any better. But when somebody I know or somebody I trust or I respect tells me, oh, this guy is great, then I would say that carries a lot more weight. I know that's kind of limited, but in terms of who I know, etc. But that definitely plays a role. I do get some emails from people I don't know very well, and I read them, but I'm not sure if they impact me as much.
I would just say not for that so much the thank you letter, but after you've interviewed, when it comes time for ranking, if you do have a #1 program or something like that, if you email me and tell me you're my #1 program, that goes a long way. I'll just say if you email somebody that, make sure that it's true. If you just say you're one of my top programs, that doesn't mean anything to me. I could be 1 or I could be 25. How many programs did you interview at? But if you're #1 or even top 3, then that goes a long way, kind of on the post-interview, getting into the ranking portion of the cycle.
Okay, I think this will be one of our last questions. From an applicant who is switching paths, what has I think we've all seen them this year and in years past, what has your experience been? What kind of either good things are you looking for or red flags?
See, for me, and this is probably judging too harsh, but just the switching is kind of a red flag, which needs explanation, particularly if you're switching from a surgical subspecialty to radiology. And now I feel like this year there's been a lot more than usual, just anecdotal, but I just want to know why. Because if you told me, you wanted to be a surgeon and you did 3 or 4 rotations in medical school, and now you're a 2nd-year intern or your 3rd-year intern, and then you realize the operating room wasn't for you, that's strange to me. It took a long time to figure that out. So I just want an explanation that makes sense. Because in the back of my mind, I'm probably too harsh. I'm thinking surgery is really hard and they're spending a lot of hours at the hospital, and maybe they just don't want to work that hard, and radiology is easy. That's my default assumption again, which is probably backwards, but I've seen it play out several times. So it always gives me pause. Not that I wouldn't give that person an interview, but it does give me pause. Or if you're already, if you're currently an intern and now you're applying because you really try to do ophthalmology, but you didn't match, or you want to do ortho and didn't match, and all of a sudden now you decide you want to be the radiologist, that's going to need a good explanation for me.
Yeah, I echo that. I gave my background story of how I chose radiology, and I applied to 2 different things, and so I understand the late transitions. I mean, believe me, it's reasonable and it's acceptable, but you have to understand also that some programs, if you look at the NRMP match data, like there's the top 5 programs, the competitive, I would say, would be like ortho, ENT, derm, ophtho, things like that. Their advisors are actually telling them to apply to something else as a backup, and so when we have somebody has ophtho written all over their application, and then all of a sudden just says, oh, but I want to do radiology, you need to have somewhat of an explanation for that, and like just a reasonable explanation of why you want to do that. Otherwise, it looks like a backup, and so that's where this harsh sort of judgment comes into play. It's definitely reasonable. I mean, if you went through these rotations, especially radiology, again, it's a late sort of rotation in the curricula of medical school. It's very very common, but it needs to have some sort of valid explanation, and even a letter of recommendation from somebody that says that, like a radiologist perhaps that says that you change and why you changed might be an important sort of role in that. But it can be kind of difficult for us to tell where it is. And if you look at, again, NRMP data for the match, the match rate for is higher for people who have contiguous ranking. So which means like you basically want to make sure you're ranking your primary spot, so that's where we kind of feel that there might be something going on when we see, ortho all over your application and then you're applying to radiology.
Okay, well, as we wrap up, I'd like to say such a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. A couple of things to end for the students who are on the session, and then for our panelists as well. The next session is posted here, or you can go in the chat box, the latest chat, or you can go back to the main Expo Hall page and click onto the next session. If there are additional questions, feel free to tweet them with the hashtag RadExpo2021. Okay, we'll be kicked out directly at 10 o'clock, so I will end this session just 2 minutes early. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Great weekend.